Welcome everybody to our Wednesday Helpful and Hopeful call. We are going to give everyone just a minute to get on and get settled. I know that there were some questions about our change of time today, so I hope everybody found us. If you do not find us and are watching this recorded, we welcome you as well. That's the joy of being able to record these conversations, is that whether you're on live or not on live, you get to sort of be a part of the conversation. And please know that if anything comes up over the course of the conversation that you have questions about, you can always reach out. So I'll welcome you again to our Wednesday Helpful and Hopeful call. We've been doing these calls since the beginning of what I keep calling the apocalypse, because that's what it feels like. I'm Dana Rosenblum. I own Dana's Kids. I work with families and children birth to about 9 years old, both with special needs and those who are typically developing, on anything from development to behavior, parenting, support, all sorts of different things to help you through the day-to-day in your lives raising young children. And I'm very excited today to have Dr. Nanika Kaur on with us. And she's going to be talking with us today about a number of things. She and I have a very similar approach, similar practices. She sort of takes it even a step further, which I was very excited to hear about. I'm going to let her tell you about herself. But I think the topic for today is so important. It's so relevant right now in this moment. In fact, in the period of time that we were talking right before this, you know, even about our own lives, thinking about this transition from being on lockdown, being quarantined, to the beginnings of things reopening and what that brings up. I think it's just so significant right now for families. So tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your practice, and then we'll kind of get into the beginning of that nitty-gritty.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. Is it a show? I'm not sure what they're calling these. Program. So yes, thanks for inviting me to have a chat with you. My name is Dr. Nanika Kaur, and I am a clinical psychologist, and I work with families, mostly parents. I do see some children, but most of my work is with parents. And I usually work with parents who are cycle breakers, right? Who really want to do something different with the families that they're creating than perhaps the family they grew up in. And the difficulties therein. A lot of times, parents that I work with are knowledgeable about respectful parenting, non-punitive parenting, and yet they find themselves having a really hard time actually following through with that, given their own experiences with their own parents. I had someone call today to say that that their own parents were unintentionally traumatizing, right? Like really loving parents who unintentionally visited a lot of things on them, you know, and, you know, parents, you know, I'm of the mind that most parents have like nothing but good intentions. Absolutely. They don't always have the tools. And what that can leave a person with is deficits in relating in the parent-child situation. So that's what I help parents with, is sort of untying those knots that are there.
Absolutely, which is just everything. You know, we sort of refer often to the ghosts in the nursery, yes. Right? Those things that we bring with us from our growing up relationships into our adult relationships, into those parenting relationships. And I think, you know, it's interesting, and we talked before about how I very often refer to psychologists and work along with psychologists because of so much of my work is that practical in the moment, right? Yes. But, you know, as much as you can in the moment implement those things, sometimes those experiences, those traumas, those, you know, even if it wasn't to a point where you would call it a trauma, but it was enough to have that impact on how you relate to others moving forward, you've got to address those stuff so that those things, so that you not only are implementing the strategies that work for your child, but so that, you know, you can apply them to yourself, so you can make that come from an authentic place. We can fake it till we make it initially, but oftentimes we've got to do that deeper work, a parent individually, to be able to sort of come with their whole selves to building up that that positive, healthy relationship with their child. So
Absolutely.
I think you're awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about what you're hearing today from your parents. You know, there's so much happening in the world right now. And when we were discussing kind of what direction did we want to go in for this conversation, there's so much that we could cover. There's so much different climate that is alerting and anxiety provoking for parents.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what you're hearing.
So, first of all, like during quarantine, right? I mean, it's still sort of quarantine time,
Right.
but it's sort of middle place. Um, a lot of just children being the transition just from normal life to COVID life, right, is still a thing that's happening. It's still sort of, maybe we've adapted a little bit to this new, you know, we talk to most people online and, you know, we stand apart from them, but there's still so much that is so odd about, it's very bizarre the way we are in life these days, right? So a parent I was speaking with, you know, the playgrounds are open now. And a parent I was talking with is just like, even the energy at the playground is so different. You know, everyone's wearing a mask, the kids are sort of stilted, you know, the parents are anxious, and it just doesn't feel the same. It's not like wild abandoned playing, you know, it's very like measured and hesitant.
Yeah,
and
it's so interesting that you say that, because the playground at the park across the street from me opens today, I think today, and I happened to be outside earlier, and it's quiet. People are there, people are playing, but there's this sort of tension. There's this tentative nature, and that's hard. It's got to be hard for parents and children alike.
Totally, both of them. And you know, I've heard a parent say, you know, my child, it used to be like a whole like thing trying to get them out of the playground. And now they're just like, yeah, I'm done. Like, let's go. You know, and that just, you know, that's like a heavy kind of thing for a parent to see. You know, it's almost like this bright light that your child was a couple of months ago is a little dimmer. And that's really, really hard. And I think that's the case for all of us, I think, you know, in terms of, you know, it's strange. I mean, how much communication, how much nonverbal communication and like micro expressions we're missing out on when everyone's wearing a mask, you have to stand further away, which sort of engenders a little bit of anxiety, like, oh, this person just stepped a little closer to me, like, what does that mean?
Who is not wearing a mask?
Right. There's just so many things to sort of be hyper vigilant about. And it doesn't lend itself to like a calm inner self, right?
Absolutely. And you know, this came up with a client of mine the other day, you know, and I think it's important to just reiterate the fact that everyone is experiencing this. And it's going to take time and repetition, as well as additional information and experiences, sort of the same as the first time you do anything, or early experiences, anything, we'll get there, but it's going to take reacclimation, right?
For everybody. I heard someone talking about how the sort of initial quarantine, like lockdown situation, was sort of everyone feeling like very lost in like this unfamiliar world, right? And now reopening is about sort of feeling lost in a familiar world. Like what was once familiar now is quite different. It doesn't, you don't really do the same thing. You might be at the office, but it's not the same. You know, you don't do the same things. You don't hang out in the same way, maybe with your coworkers like you once did. So it's like navigating something that's sort of like familiar, you know it, but nothing is happening in the way it used to in that familiar space. So, I mean, like the playground, for instance, right? Like here we are at the playground, which, you know, we've come to like every day for 4 years, and then, but we're not doing the same thing while we're here, you know?
Or feeling the same way.
Or feeling the same way.
And that's a lot. Again, you know, it's a lot for everyone to process. And I think, you know, again, as we sort of think about how to manage that, how do we present that to children? How do we support children through it? I know those are things that we're going to be discussing as we continue. But I think, you know, that conversation is important.
Yes. And, you know, speaking of being like we've talked about, like that authentic person in your relationship with your child. I think it's also really important for parents to be authentic in age appropriate ways about their own stress level, right? Like the idea of like, it's not you, it's my stress.
Right.
Because kids will decide that, oh, my parents' upset is about me, right? So it's sort of like, kids are stressed out, parents are stressed out, and it's so sort of okay to say, I'm having a tough day today, and I'm trying to use my kind words and all of that stuff. It's harder for me today. You know what I mean?
Right.
And just saying things like that to give kids, like, first of all, parents are human too. Second of all, here are, I can talk openly about the things that I struggle with. And, we can talk about it together, share that stress with one another. And also it's important for parents to sort of model how they're managing, how they're coping with the stress, right? So I'm feeling really stressed out right now. I'm going to take some deep breaths, or I'm going to go take 5 minutes and like lie down, or I'm going to read a book for like whatever it is that parents do to sort of bring themselves back to a state of equilibrium when their anxiety has gotten quite high. Sort of saying out loud what your process is. It gives kids ideas for like, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, what can I do?
Right. Well, I loved when we spoke the other day, and I hope you don't mind that I share this, but I loved your transition from being in your office to being the caregiver to your daughter. And would you mind sharing sort of a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, like the idea of moving from here in my home office to, as soon as I open the door, it's like, child running at you with lots of questions and demands and needs immediately. And we talked about how before, when I had my office in downtown Brooklyn, which I hope to be back there someday, there's the bus ride home or the subway ride home. There's like a transitional space between my work and my parenting, roles, right? And now that there isn't that, I sort of built in one, right? And so I come right out of the room and I set a timer, and I'm like, for 20 minutes, I'm just like taking some time, and I will be right with you. Like I will let me put that on the list of things I will get to in 20 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, I hear you. I know that you've got these needs. And also, like, I really need to like switch my mind over.
Right.
And she's really understanding it more and more, and really just, okay, I know I have to go and play a little bit until mama's ready to like engage.
Right. And doesn't mean that process, is going to be easy. It's a learning process for children. It's a learning process for the adult who is setting that boundary to say, here's what I need. But I think, again, in the increased anxiety, and we had talked a little bit about kind of phases of quarantine, right? These phases that we've all gone through, like, oh my God, there was no transition in, now we're on lockdown, but it's going to be short.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're in this. It's going to be longer. How do I make this manageable? What's the school piece? Whatever. Okay, now school is over. Okay, now things are reopening. So there are all of these moments, and there have been sort of these ebbs and flows, I think, in the general sense of anxiety. Yes. And we are in one now where there's this real heightened anxiety. And this idea of being able to say, here's what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm feeling, while it would be great to think that nobody had to experience anxiety, certainly not about this, there's both an opportunity to take care of yourself and honor those feelings, because that's going to allow you to be a better parent and a more authentic.
Without that 20 minutes, nobody wants to be around Dr. Nanika Kaur without those 20 minutes. Nobody wants that.
Nobody's got
It's good for us all. It's good for us all.
Right. But what you said, I think, is so important with the idea that you're also teaching her and walking her through the process of managing those emotions. And that's a concept that I hold near and dear to my heart, is really not hiding from children your feelings and how you manage them, but that's how they learn. That's how they learn resiliency. That's how they learn that it's okay to say, I need a breather for a minute. So particularly in this heightened time, I think that, there is benefit for everyone to be able to just acknowledge that, okay, going to the playground right now. And again, absolutely in an age appropriate manner, but it's okay to say, yeah, this feels different. this is feeling
Yeah,
right now.
just to acknowledge it, right? Because that's validating for a child. I mean, a child may not come out and say the playground just doesn't feel cool, and some children may, but
right.
some children may like be experiencing those feelings, but it helps them when you put words to their experience, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when you give them some words to say, yeah, everything feels kind of off, you know, and then they're like, okay, so I'm not like bonkers, like it's true. What I'm experiencing is actually happening. It does feel
Right.
off. It is really off, you
Yeah, and
know?
it's interesting, even thinking about the idea of ghosts in the nursery. You know, I think that there are parents who want to preserve that bubble for
Mhm.
children, and it's all okay, and everything's great, and it's all going to be fine. And I think not only does that sort of flash forward to having adults who need that and can't manage when it's not like that, but it also doesn't do children any service in the current moment,
That's
right?
right. Because I mean, when you earlier you talked about, we were talking about sort of traumas, and really a trauma is just sort of being left alone with any overwhelming feelings. It doesn't necessarily have to be a car crash or some life-threatening event. It could just be like I am overcome with anger or overcome with sadness, and I'm sort of all by myself, and no one's helping me organize those feelings at all.
Yeah.
And and that can be a trauma, like a relational kind of trauma. I'm alone with my feelings and I don't know what to do. And
Absolutely.
so, and little things like that happen all the time, like misattunements happen all the time, right? And it's really not about never having those as much as it is about repairing them when they do.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit more about what you're hearing sort of in this current space.
The well, depending on we're talking about younger children, and you know the going back to having play dates, or you know these physically
Mm,
distanced play dates, and how do we do that, and all, just we were talking before, just the risk assessment, like how much risk are we going to bring in, you know, are we going to send the kids back to school, are we not going to send the kids back to school, if we don't, what are we going to do, like there's just so many
mhm.
decisions to be made
Yeah.
in a climate of so many unknowns, right? So how
Mhm.
can you make these definitive, you sort of have to have like plan A, B, and C depending on what happens,
Right.
right? Like, because we just don't know what it's
Right.
going to look like exactly. And then, you know, the idea of, you know, I'm a parent maybe dealing with whether or not I'm going to send my child back to school, but also what if I'm a teacher who's also a parent? Do I send
Right.
my child back to school? How do I keep my own child on track while trying to keep other people's children on track? You know, there's
Right.
so many like spinning plates at the same time.
Mhm.
And other things that I've been hearing too is just where the children are right now after having been inside, sort of kept away from other people for so long, is a lot of like a lowered energy, like not wanting to go outside, wanting to sort of, I mean, going outside really entails like all of these extra measures now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it's like, well, it's easier just to be inside where I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to stay away from anybody. I don't have to like, you know, have my parents like, don't touch that, stay away from that, move away. You know what I mean? Like it
Right.
seems less anxiety provoking just to stay inside.
Right.
Outside
Right.
doesn't seem as fun. And then, but a lot of parents are like, but we still need to go out. We still need to, you know, move our bodies and exercise and all of those things. And kids are having a lot of resistance to that. I'm seeing that throughout the age span, from
Yes.
toddlers through teenagers.
So how do you help a parent with that? And I do want to go back and hear a little bit about how you are talking with parents who may be presenting with anxiety about all these decisions, sort of how you help them navigate that. But let's stick with this idea, because I think this is very true. This idea that across the ages, children are feeling like they just would rather stay inside.
Yeah.
Whatever the underlying piece of that, whether it's the effort or the anxiety or whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
how have you been encouraging parents to navigate that with children? What are you encouraging them to say to their kids?
Well, I always start with you know, what is your expectation? Is your expectation that the child leaves the house? Is your expectation that your child leaves the house and does something? You know, decide what what your actual expectation is. And then going to your child, especially if your child is over, let's say 4,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and saying, you know, let's think about it. Like you know, what are your concerns about going outside? And just finding out from them, like
Mm-hmm.
you listed a couple of things it could be, right? Like what, but that's all of conjecture, right? It's sort of like, what is going on? What is the uncool thing about being outside? Seeing if you can find out some information and see, like, can we mitigate that for the child? If it's about social distancing, maybe there's a place you can go in like Prospect Park where there's nobody else around and they can take their mask off and run around because nobody else is there. It depends on what's going on for the child, but I think it's always go to your child and see if you can find out from them what are the obstacles in their way. And
I think just to jump in there, I think it's so important to keep those questions open-ended. And again, certainly with that 4+ crowd where they can give you a little bit more of an answer, but making sure that you're not feeding them are you scared to see other people? Are you worried about getting sick, right? So just kind of keeping that really open-ended conversation, tell me what you're thinking about, it seems like you're not so sure. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's sort of like that Ross Green model of like collaborative problem solving. It's like, I notice, that going outside seems really difficult. What's up with that?
Right.
And just leaving it and see what they say.
Absolutely.
And see what and also remembering that perhaps it's not one single conversation, that it could be several conversations for you to for them to feel comfortable enough to sort of, explaining what's going on for them, or even just thinking about it. Maybe you plant a seed with this first conversation, and then they sort of have to process, like, what is going on for me? I don't even really know. You know what I mean? But in 2 days, they might be able to say, like, actually, I think this is what it is. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like,
they're people too.
Right. Just giving them time to sort of think about, and just making it open-ended. Maybe you don't feel like talking about it right now, but if, something comes to you, let me know. Like, I'm here to talk about it, right? Like, letting them know that you're open to hearing what their concerns are and that you want to help them. Like, it's really important for us to get outside. So I'd like to make it easier for you in some way if I can. So if you've got any ideas, let me know.
And if a child is super resistant, do you encourage a parent to sort of force them along, or?
It depends. It depends on your child. Some children, you can, if you can get them out of the door once they're out, they're fine. But if getting them outside means that there's just going to be meltdowns and tantrums and a nightmare, then maybe forego, right? It depends on your own child, sort of. And, and even one child can be one way one day, and one day, very malleable one day, and then very resistant the next. So it's sort of like a case by case, moment by moment assessment of like, where is my child right now?
And I just want to let everybody know who's listening, if at any point you have questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There's also the chat. You can put questions into that box at any point. I will keep an eye on it. If it's relevant in the moment, I will read them out. If not, then I'll sort of hang on to them until the end. I want to go back with you for a second to this idea of decision-making and all of this, in this transition, thinking about what's safe for me, making decisions before you kind of have all the information you might like, even though that's our reality. And on some level, it makes me think about a little bit of a parallel process for, to what parents are setting up as an opportunity for their children to think through and talk about what feels hard. What does that look like for you and your clients in terms of, coming to you feeling anxious about this process of decision making?
Yeah. So what a lot of it is validating and like listening, right? Because first, it's the first time that in my experience where all of us, like me as the therapist, but also like we're all sort of experiencing the same stressors at the same time. And it may be like, I've heard people say, we may not be in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. You know what I mean? Like, so it's affecting us maybe differently, but it is affecting us in some fashion, and it's, I think, a lot about validating and listening and especially the parents I have who are dealing with older children in their teens, there's a lot of like, speaking of the same storm in different boats, a lot of like, well, you have it better than somebody else. Like, like pull up your bootstraps, like, get off the video game and like, get out there, do some stuff. And it's like, it's like, well, you have it so good. It could have been worse. We could have it so much worse. There's, and it's like, validating someone's experience. It may be true that, you know, everybody has their job and, you know, people are safe and nobody's sick. At the same time, a child still may be feeling super isolated, super depressed about that, super anxious about what happens next. I mean, especially older kids, it's like, what's happening with school? Like, you know, am I doing well? How's it going to affect me later? You know, just all kinds of things that older kids are stressing about that are outside of just the missing of the social pieces. And the younger kids who can't talk about that, you know, a lot of behaviors, a lot of irritability and anger and acting out. And parents then are super anxious. And it's like, how do I help my kid when I'm feeling so stressed out? And that's where I go back to a mindfulness piece, right? And how can, like, present moment awareness becomes really important, I think, in these times, because we can get very stuck in the future place of like, what's going to happen? Like, is it going to be bad? Is it going to be good? You know, there's a lot of ways where you can get sort of stuck in that anxiety place about the unknowns that you can't control in the future. So like pulling yourself back into the present moment is always a good way of being like, here in this moment, right now, like no one is sick, or if that's true for you, right? And like, I am safe in this moment. And, you know, in this moment, all of my people are here and we're all good, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the next moments, but in this moment, let us be here, right? And so I, you know, have a lot of different ways that I, you know, obviously breathing and doing like fun family mindfulness things. You know, if you have a chime, or you can even have the chime apps like that make a chime, the chiming sound. And it's like, can you listen, right? So we all put the chime sound on like as a family, and everybody raises their hand when they can't hear it anymore. You know, it sort of reverberates for a long time. And it's like, and so you sort of are in the present moment, listening for like deeply listening to what's going on. And, you know, when you are outside, if you are lucky enough to have a child who's happy to be outside,
take it.
yes, just anything about sort of noticing what's going on. Like, oh, do you feel the breeze on your skin? Like, what different colors do you see around you? Just sort of coming into this moment right now. Oh, I see the leaves blowing in the trees. What do you see? What do you hear? How many sounds can you name? I can hear a car honking. I can hear a dog barking. Like, it really brings you into the present.
I love that as a strategy for managing anxiety in general, both for children and adults. I mean, I think, you know, I often talk about, you know, what do you know, right? As a strategy for young children who are experiencing anxiety, right? What do you know already about this thing that may be new? What parts of it do you know? But that idea of sort of bringing them back to what are you noticing right now in this present moment, I think it does help pull you back from that spiral thinking, you know, all those what ifs. Well, what if, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And that's really where you kind of get caught. And I do think this is another one of those experiences, those parallel processes where a parent can really model that. A parent can really model taking that moment to be present. And not worry about the next thing.
Right. And practicing those, and practicing those kinds of things when no one is like actively very anxious, so that it's easier to like grab onto when you are anxious, right? So it's just sort of practicing it as just a general thing we do. And, you know, my child is used to that. So she, you know, sometimes we'll be outside and she'll be like, oh, mama, do you feel the breeze? Do you feel the wind? You know what I mean? Like she comes into these moments of presence, you know, and notices those things. And that's really helpful.
Powerful for a little one, right?
Yeah. And it's helpful when they are feeling more dysregulated, you know, to be like, you know, can you feel my hands touching your hands right now? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, can you feel my hand on your back right now? Like, just attending to that, you know, is something they're used to doing already, so they can sort of bring themselves out of it sometimes.
Right. And I think you're absolutely dead on in that using these strategies, practicing this mindfulness during those calm, proactive times, right? Where you're not breaking through dysregulation or overpowering feelings, right? That's how we make those strategies accessible during the more highly charged times.
So, and both of you are practicing, right? You as a parent are practicing offering these things, you know, like, and ways to offer them when the child is dysregulated and the child is practicing using those skills.
Absolutely. What happens for the parent who wants to get their child to the park, thinks it would be a good thing, but is paralyzed by their own feelings about it, and is struggling internally? They know they're going to do it, but they're worried that their own stuff is going to leak over.
I mean, I think, again, like acknowledging, right? So we all want to feel heard, right? We talk about kids having big feelings and, you know, listening to the feelings and validating the feelings. Like, we can do that for ourselves, right? We can notice that we are feeling anxious. We can say like, oh, like there's a difference between experiencing the anxiety and noticing that you're experiencing the anxiety. Those are like two different mind states, right? And one is, the second one, noticing that you have the anxiety, is like you're getting a tiny bit of distance from the anxiety. Like, and you know, for some people who maybe are very well practiced, they can get like 5 giant steps of distance, and some people can only get like a tiny step of distance, but still, yeah, exactly, whatever. And so the idea is, can you sort of be a witness and notice what's going on for you and be that soothing person for yourself? Like, I know it's hard to go to the playground. I know it's going to be anxiety provoking. Also, it's going to be good for you, and you can do hard things, right? Like, you can do hard things. You're raising a child. That's a hard thing. You've already proven to yourself that you can do hard things, right? So like, this is what you're already there.
You're on the win side already. You're good.
Yeah. So it's just like self-soothing, right? And I think that's really important for all of us at this time. Soothing oneself. And that's another thing that parents can model, right? You know, just talking out loud, like, I'm really angry right now, but I'm going to take some breaths and I'm going to get myself together. Do you know what I mean? And just modeling out loud, like, here are the feelings, here's what I'm doing about it, you know? And because there's something that can be done about them. You know, you don't have to let them, you're not powerless, right? And also, emotions are not dangerous to have, right? Like, we can all survive these emotions. We just have to manage. We don't want these emotions to be driving our behavior all the time, you know? So,
I mean, this is why I love you. I mean, this is it. This is what it's about. And by the way, this is what it's about during the pandemic, certainly, but in the day-to-day, right? There's such a push right now about building grit and resiliency and social emotional skills. And this is how we do it in the day-to-day, right?
Absolutely.
You live it. You live it in the day-to-day. You give yourself those gifts, and then your children live it and experience the gift and do it for themselves as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk, and if I have a question here, which is something I was going to ask you anyway. What about the parent who gets there and they get to the playground or wherever it is, and they feel like they have messed it up in some way? They are all over their child about, put the mask on, don't touch that, and their anxiety has broken through.
Yeah.
How do we, and the question is, how do we fix it? But how do we fix it?
Right. So, I mean, if we're talking, if I think I understand the question, is it's sort of not necessarily, I'm thinking not necessarily fixing it in the moment. Like, sometimes the moment just gets away from you.
Right.
But later on, it's like coming back to them and saying, you know, I was feeling this way during said interaction or said, you know, situation earlier. And, you know, I just wasn't, that wasn't really how I wanted to act. Like, what I wanted to do was X, Y, Z. And, you know, what was that like for you, right? Just sort of asking them what was their experience of the same moment, right? Because I imagine it will be different.
Right.
And sort of just checking in with them and just going back and saying, you know what, wasn't pleased about how I acted. I'm going to try to do better next time. And, you know, our relationship can handle like mistakes and challenges that happen between us. We can still come back together at the end. And that's what you're teaching a child when you are able to make that repair. You know, you're saying like, maybe I was a little all over you. Maybe I was a little intrusive. And, you know, what I wanted to do was give you a little more space to play. So I'm going to remind myself of that next time. And again, that's going back to that space of acknowledging to the child that something happened, right? I think a lot of us grew up in ways where, let's say we had some altercation with our parent, and then like an hour later, we're all supposed to go back to like, nothing happened.
Right.
Nobody mentions that thing ever again.
We're not talking about it. Right.
We're not going to talk about it ever again, but you still have feelings, or you're still angry, or you're still sad, but no one's attending to that. So again, you learn to just sort of, you learn about relationships that emotions don't belong here. Like, we can't do emotions with each other. Right. I have to do that by myself. And that can present a lot of problems as an adult person, or even as, you know, an older kid, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's like, what are they learning about relationships when you're able to go back to them and say, you know, if I had a chance to have a do-over, this is what I would have done. And, you know, and I'm acknowledging that that might have been upsetting for you, and I'm sorry about that. And so if a kid was upset by it, you know, it's like, yeah, I was upset. And, you know, again, it's not all in my head. Like, it actually happened. I can trust my feelings. I can trust that what I feel is the truth, because my parent is saying, yeah, like, I really was off my game in some way. Right. Right? So,
and what about a younger child in that situation? Do you recommend that people sort of go in and try it again and sort of have the repetition of maybe, you know, the repair in the actual doing?
You can. I mean, even from a very, very young child, you can still, I mean, even an infant. I mean, when I'm thinking about Rye, and I'm thinking about the ways in which, like, infants are humans, right? And they may not understand all the language, but they absolutely can understand the energy, the emotion, right? Yep. And so you being like, you know, I'm so sorry, you know, I was really feeling really worried earlier. And just, even just that sound of the sort of prosody in your voice and everything is like making a repair. Like, I see that we had this disconnection, but here we are coming back together again, you know? And it's from the start, they can have, you as a parent can have that, you know, reminding yourself of like, oh yes, let me reconnect. You know, I felt like something was off, and now I can come back and remind myself, remind my baby that, you know, we're a team here.
Right, we're okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that intonation and the energy, and, you know, it's why we go back again and again to how do we do this in a way that's developmentally appropriate, but there are ways that are developmentally appropriate with the way you physically engage a baby when something hasn't gone well, the way, you know, the tone of your voice, the volume of your voice, the way you move your body, right? So even with a baby, you know, with a toddler, with a 2, I'm going to say, like, that was hard.
Yes.
You know, and I'm going to use my facial expressions, and I'm going to use my tone to give them what they need from that. And yes, we don't need to go into long, drawn out explanations, but they feel it and they experience it. And I think that repair is, it's so meaningful for both sides.
So meaningful for both sides.
As a parent, that you can do that, even with your child. And I will never forget sort of having a long conversation with a parent years ago about being able to apologize to a child when things don't go the way you want. And, you know, this having a back and forth with one of the parents about sort of losing ground, and whether you were losing ground by apologizing.
Right.
Like, you know, we need to put the relationship first.
Right. And what does a child learn from a relationship in which a parent apologizes?
Right.
They learn that parents are people too. Parents make mistakes. Parents take responsibility for their mistakes. And so can I. Oh, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like to take responsibility for your actions, right? And to be sorry and to try to do better, you know, next time. And kids are so forgiving, you know, and it's like, and they appreciate it so much, and they'll be like, that's okay. Like, but they begin to understand you as a complex human being, right? And that they realize, oh, I'm a complex human. Like, we're all very complex, right?
We're all
like
doing this.
Mama has good days and bad days. Like, one person can show up in lots of different ways, and we can love them all, right? And we can like be connected to them all in some way, you know?
Just thinking some more about this transitioning idea and sort of coming back into more public spaces and the things that we are seeing and doing on a day-to-day basis. And I know some of what I've been hearing is about children whose friends and family and families of their friends may have different rules and be doing different things than they are. Some children who are going to camp, others who aren't. Even, I've got families who are engaged in protesting and, not. How do you recommend for parents to, I think there's often this like, I'm the mean parent, I'm the bad one, like I don't let my kid do anything. All of my friends are letting their kids do this. I'm not comfortable yet. How do you help parents navigate that?
I mean, again, going with authenticity. If you're not comfortable with something, like go with it. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't try to force yourself to do something you're not comfortable with. If you're not comfortable being out at the protest, if you're not comfortable, having, going to a birthday party, even if it's physically distanced or something, because you're worried about that, then don't do that. Because first of all, you're not going to have a good time while you're there, right? Like if you're so anxious,
you got to do what feels good.
Absolutely. It's part of your self-care to like be aligned with your boundaries that you want to set, right? Like if you really are feeling like this isn't for me and not for our family, it's just like any other boundary you're setting, right? There might be a lot of big feelings. Maybe your child is like, well, but Sally is doing that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, why can't we go? And it's like hearing those feelings, like, it's really hard to see people doing stuff that our family isn't doing yet, and like just holding space for the difficult feelings that may bring up for your child who is maybe ready to dive back in, and you're like, I need some time. But I would honor that. I mean, honor your own level of comfort with whatever risks might be there. Because everybody is different. And there are some people who really feel comfortable and are like, we're good. And if you're not that person, you're not necessarily mean mommy, right? You're trying to keep yourself safe, and that's legit. Legit.
Right. And I think, acknowledging, and it goes back to this sort of, are you experiencing the anxiety, or can you step back and notice the anxiety? I think you can do the same thing with guilt.
Yes.
Right? It's okay to step back and say, I'm feeling guilty about this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, and you don't necessarily have to say this to a child, but like, I'm not going to change my decision because I feel guilty, because I need to do what I feel is right as the parent.
That's right.
But you can notice that you are feeling guilty. You can.
Right. And you make that good point too, that thinking about the stepping back from your, whatever, big emotion you might be having. It's the idea that you can have the emotion and not feel compelled to act on the emotion. Right. So it's sort of like if sometimes we have an urge to do something, and it's almost like it feels like a mandate. We have to do it, right? But it's not a mandate. It's just a feeling you're experiencing that if you sort of hang out with it for maybe, 1 to 5 minutes, it probably will dissipate. Like, that urge to do something, or that urge to like take back the boundary, will like dissipate. Like sit with the guilt for a second. Like, oh yeah, this is what guilty feels like. How do I know I feel guilty? Do I feel like a weird feeling in my stomach? Just like be with it for a second. And
so interesting. I do something called a mad minute with children, right? And so I talk with parents a lot about not yanking kids out of feeling mad or upset or whatever it is, to let them experience that.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've really thought about it to such an extent, just about that individual person, just being able to step back and have their own mad minute, right?
Yes,
and sort
absolutely.
of being able to say, like, I don't have to act on this second.
That's right. You can take a pause, like unless somebody's life is in danger, like nothing has to be done this exact second. You can wait a single minute, to like come back to equilibrium. You know what I mean? Like, it's not an emergency. Janet Lansbury also often says that idea of like, your kid falls down. It's like, it's not an emergency.
Right.
You remain calm. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
right.
And that really, that phrase has really gotten me and many parents I know, like through just reminding yourself, like, okay, I'm feeling guilty, but like my guilt is not an emergency. I don't have to do anything about that. I can just be with it for a second.
Right. I think that is just incredibly powerful. And I hope everyone re-listens to that part of the conversation, because, the feelings are real.
Yes.
It's okay to notice that you're experiencing them. It doesn't mean that you have to act on them, make a change. certainly not immediately, right?
Right,
You're
right.
allowed to have the moments of reflection. You're allowed to have the moment of experience. And then sort of when you're, and again, it's the same way, we ask parents to sort of co-regulate with their children, right? When
Yes.
your child is escalating, you come down to help them come down. It's almost doing that for yourself. Right?
Absolutely.
It's coming to this place where I'm elevated right now. I'm not going to act on that. I'm going to wait until I can help myself come back to a more grounded level and then make my decisions, then take my action.
Yeah, I mean, like the like, let me think about it for a minute, right? Like your kid, you just give yourself some space. Like, let me take a minute to like think about this and I'll get right back to you. You know what I mean? Like, don't try not to make the decisions from the like overwhelmed place.
Right. It's funny. That's a strategy. When I do teacher training, we talk a lot about that, not feeling like you have to give an answer right away and being able to say, great question. Let me give it some thought. Yeah. And I think that pause is just, again, so powerful. We are coming to our last sort of 10-ish minutes.
Wow.
Right?
That was like 5 seconds.
You and I, we could just keep going. Tell me a little bit more about kind of what you're hearing right now about parents' concerns, parents' questions in this transition and managing this transition.
I think the lowering of expectations is a common theme. The idea of like, I can't really expect from my child what I expected from them 6 months ago, right? It's sort of like the easing of expectations, which is easier and harder for some families to do, right? Some families are still trying to like do the same thing, and it's like, well, but your child is not able to meet that expectation right now. Like, this is a stressful time, right? So it's sort of the idea of, managing expectations, managing your own expectations of yourself, but also of your child. Like, we don't necessarily have all the bandwidth to be like the peppy parent we might have been a couple of months ago who was like, no screen time, like, now it's like, oh, okay, like the screen is raising your child. Like, that's okay. that's going to happen for a little while. But I mean, yeah, just like accepting that your bandwidth and everybody's bandwidth is different, and thinking about the different people in the family and that everyone has different needs, right? Like, making sure that everyone in the family feels heard, feels supported, doesn't feel alone in their feelings. Like, in the sort of hustle and bustle of trying to like work from home, take care of the kids, that there's just so much movement and like just go. And people sometimes are not even slowing down until it's bedtime, like until they're like literally lying in bed because there's so much to be done during the waking hours. But it's like that idea of trying to slow down. I mean, a lot of my families are talking about just the like sort of breakneck speed of everything. It's like you sort of think you're at home and so it should be sort of chill, but there's like something happening every second. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's a lot of that.
It's funny you say that. The newsletter I sent out this month was, with the subject line, as if we all have extra time. And I sent out a bunch of articles, including your article from the New York Times. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about kind of what that quote was about?
Yeah, that was about parenting overload, right? It was talking about the idea of, or my piece was talking about how, your bandwidth is lower as a parent, and trying to have some self-compassion for yourself, some compassion for your kids. Like, nobody's at their best, and, caring for yourself, taking the 20 minutes after work, or, setting those boundaries around your own like mental wellness, because like, who is going to be parenting your child? Like, depleted you, like stressed out you, or like, I got 20 minutes to myself you know what I mean? Like, those two people are very different parents, and so it's the piece in the Times was just about, there's so many things piled on us. At the time that I was interviewed for that, it was like the protest had just begun. So it's like, trying to figure out what's going on with your feelings about like structural racism, and then like fear of COVID, and working from home and trying to keep your job while you're trying to raise your child in the remote learning. Like, it's just like so many things. So many things. And all of those things do not lend themselves to a very calm and even parent, right? So it's about like giving yourself a break and not having the expectations of yourself be so high.
Yeah. And I think, you know, almost even stepping back in moments as we just did to just laugh at sort of how ridiculous it is,
Yep.
the number of things. And I will never forget, had to be maybe 3 or 4 days into like New York is shut down. And there was some post about like using this time to write that book you always thought that you would, and just feeling like, I'm sorry, what? What?
When am I going to do that? Like, I'm sorry.
I'm not, I have to find toilet paper. Like, I don't know about you writing a book, but and I think just that management of your expectations for yourself and being able to say, and your child, and not that all expectations go out the window.
Right.
One of the things, you know, we have spoken about is sort of still maintaining some expectations, still maintaining some semblance of a routine, right? Even, you know, in your example for your daughter and you making the transition from working to being mom, even the routine of taking that time is going to be helpful for
Yes.
her, right? Because that routine is important for children to whatever extent you can do it. And that may look different now than it did before quarantine, but just sort of that acknowledgement that it's just not going to be the same.
It's not going to be the same. And there's grief in that, you know, and I think that that's really important to also acknowledge, that there's grief in so many parts of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a grief of like the life that we knew pre-COVID, like it just doesn't really exist anymore. And
Right.
that's really difficult to take in.
Yeah.
But then going back into the world, the reopening,
right,
and doing life, but now it looks so different. And
right.
And there's a lot of grief in that. And so I think, you know, to make some room for that, to hold some space for that for ourselves, like, you know, there's some sadness around that for you, for your kids.
Right. And it makes me think of two things. One is that there was just an article about Liebler-Ross, who did the stages of grief.
Oh yeah.
Kubler-Ross.
Kubler-Ross.
And, you know, where we all are in a variety of different ways, truly experiencing grief. And the problem right now for so many is that where grief usually progresses in these particular steps, for the most part, we keep getting kicked back to the early steps as more and more things happen. And I think both for a parent and for a child, acknowledging being in that emotion, acknowledging being in that process wherever you are is so much more important than trying to get yourself out of it.
Yes,
right? You've
absolutely.
got to experience it authentically to be and acknowledge what those limits are, what those feelings are, if you're ever really going to be able to come through it. And it takes me back to exactly what you do, which is cycle breaking.
Yes.
Right? If you have the chance to experience that fully, to take that, to process through that, right? You carry it with you. These things don't disappear.
Absolutely.
And not that the work can't be done later, but doing the work when you're in it, right, allows you to move forward with the growth. And in the best of situations, I hope that we all walk away with some of that growth from this. But at least with a little bit more self-compassion to be able to say, you know, some days I'm handling this beautifully and some days I'm not. And, you know, I can repair that as I go.
Yeah. And remembering that, you know, you were talking about resilience earlier, you know, it's coming through this with, you know, that sort of one of those last stages of grief that was added on later is like making meaning of something, right? Mm-hmm. Like the meaning making that comes from the grief, like all the grief one might experience. Like, what does it say about you? Like, what is good? Like, what are you seeing that's good about your family? Like, how, like, there's some positive that's probably come out of being together or experiences or just surviving together, right? And you can hold on to that as well.
Yeah, I actually talked with someone about the idea of ritual, and it makes me think about your sort of being in the present moment and some of those present moment mindfulness practices. Like, what a beautiful ritual to bring out of this experience, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that when we think about all the areas where we might feel concerned about the aftermath for children, if they have some rituals, if they have some strategies that they have learned in this process that connects them with themselves and with their family, is, well, we've given them that touch point as we come out of this to come back to. And I think about like transition objects that we use for young children when they first separate. You know, it's almost the same thing as we start to re-enter, right? Having that touch point back, having that ritual, that something that made me feel grounded and safe when I was still inside, and that I can take with me as I begin to re-enter, right? And then come back and share it inside again. That connectedness, I think, brings a lot of safety for children and for parents.
And you bring up another good point, and that I meant to say is that the idea of like, if your child is going to go to camp, or if they're going to go back to school, like coming up with a plan with your child, like talking about it with them ahead of time, like this is what you might expect, this is what it could be like, here's something you can do if things feel stressful, like giving them some some sort of pre-briefing, as as it were, like like giving them a little picture of, or just thinking out loud with them about what they think it's going to be like.
Yeah, and I think there's been another meme going around about sort of the way a parent manages the information that comes out about what school might look like in the fall. The job of the parent is to share that with a child in a way that helps a child feel positive about it, feel okay about it. And it's the same thing you're talking about. Like, let's think about what this might look like together. Let's understand this together, so that it's not just another like, oh, that's not the way it was supposed to be, or I wanted it to be. Right?
Absolutely.
Together, and so we can make a plan that feels more comfortable, that feels not so devastating at every turn, which I think has come up a lot.
Right. And that's like a big thing when I think of cycle breaking, right? I think I certainly grew up in an era where like kids are resilient, just send them out. You know what I mean? Like no one's like preparing you for anything. Like things are just sort of like happening to you, you know what I mean? And no one's talking you through anything, and so we have this opportunity with this like knowledge, this new way of looking at parent-child relationships that maybe wasn't so prevalent back when we were small. We have these opportunities to give kids so many more tools and to feel so much more like connected and supported and like scaffolded as they go through their life.
Yes. You are wonderful, and I'm so appreciative that you made the time to do this. This was really just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being here, for your time. Everybody who's listening, please know that Dr. Nanika Kaur is on Instagram. She is on Facebook. She's got a website. You can find her. If you can't find her and you're on my website, email me. I'll help you find her. She's wonderful. And really just an incredibly supportive person as you're going through your parenting and your personal journey, if you do feel like you need extra support. So thank you again for being here. I'm so appreciative. In the coming weeks, we will have a professional talking with us about the different choices when it comes to homeschooling. We'll have someone on who's going to talk a little bit about feeding. Lots of good things coming up in the weeks to come. But again, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Glad to see you. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.